back to the One Room at a Time podcast. I'm your host, Atticus LeBlanc, CEO of PadSplit, and we are back for part 2 of our conversation with Beth Silverman, the co-founder and executive director for Lotus campaign. Beth, thanks again for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And let's jump right back in. I want to continue the conversation a little around policy and trends, and then also just looking towards the future. So, as you know, at PadSplit, we often talk about aligning incentives so that solutions can scale sustainably. And it sounds like you guys do a lot of that as well. And want to just lean in a little bit more there and understanding how does incentive alignment or frankly misalignment show up in the homelessness space from your perspective?
Oh man, what a question. I often think that unfortunately we're only solving at two extreme ends for solutions to homelessness: the emergency intervention, the emergency solutions. So that's at the very short term, right away, stop the bleed, as I call it, or looking out way too far ahead. So permanent housing solutions. And I think where we fail is what are those interim next step solutions. And I think that's where Lotus and honestly PadSplit come in, is to provide sort of what's in the middle as we're doing
Sure.
the emergency stuff, and then the interventions and developments and solutions that take much longer of a runway to get off the ground. I think also we have been using as a country the same toolkit for decades when it comes to homelessness, and the structural drivers have changed. We know, because we have data, that there are much bigger drivers today related to supply and demand around housing, but we seem to be still treating just the social drivers for homelessness. And I think there are two really big thinkers in this space: Dr. Greg Colburn out of University of Washington, who really looks at the real estate economic side, and then Dr. Margot Cashel, who really looks at the connections between health outcomes and housing stability. But, I think we kind of weaponize subsidies too. And I've always found that funny.
What do you mean by weaponized subsidies? What do you mean by that?
Well, I think we assign positive and negative values to subsidies depending on what they're being used for. But I'll give you some personal examples. I went to the University of Maryland for undergraduate. I got a scholarship because I worked really hard, allegedly, in high school and was eligible for like a merit-based scholarship through the state. That was really helpful for me. I also get a mortgage interest deduction every year. Those to me are both subsidies. I'm not sure we think about them like that. Also, when I moved to New York after grad school, had my first job, literally had just opened a credit card, had never really had a lot of housing history. I was always in group houses to save money. So my dad co-signed my first lease. He was essentially signing up to subsidize my rent if for some reason I couldn't pay it.
Sure.
And to me, those are all subsidies in my mind. But it's interesting when we think about housing. I think there's this pervasive mythology we assign to subsidies related to housing, whether it's vouchers, low-income housing tax credits, new market tax credits, when all they are just inducements to help remove roadblocks in the market. So no different than my dad doing me a really sort of big guarantee favor of signing, helping to co-sign my first lease.
So you mean like political weaponization and just kind of a lightning rod for debate or attack.
And why? I mean, if there's sort of a way to get catalytic capital or get a roadblock removed, why wouldn't we use that?
Sure. Yeah. No, totally understood. So couch that in terms of incentive alignment, misalignment as it relates to homelessness, if you can, and specific to your work.
Yeah, so, I mean, we sit in this interesting space because we're not necessarily in the public ecosystem, right? We partner with, for example, the Mecklenburg County, which is a city of Charlotte, the county that it sits in. We partner with a ton of nonprofits that get local regional and federal dollars. But I'm not sure sort of the incentives are matching the needs, right? If we know that some of the biggest struggles for nonprofits are to help find their clients housing, what are the tools they have
Sure.
besides vouchers,
Yep.
right? Or if we know sort of the biggest risk to a landlord is I'm really worried that once this family is dropped off, they won't have the ongoing care they have. So are we properly funding sort of case management and a network of support? I also get super nervous about the tools we have to actually preserve or create new housing. I think we're using really good tools, but they've been around for a while and they're limited in their scope. So, if we think of tax credits or, just certain, whether it's the new market tax credits or opportunity zones, they're limited in their scope of what they can do. And I think there are a bunch of smart people that work on this stuff all day long, and there are a ton of people in the development and investment space who could probably list what all their roadblocks are. And I wonder if we could just turn
Make
those
it a little
roadblocks
simpler.
into
Yeah.
tools. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. So who do you think is getting things done the right way, at least from a government perspective, where there's maybe best practice here for others, and what encourages you from the cities or states that you've seen, and what are they trying to do that's ultimately leading good results?
Yeah, I think this is going to sound really simple, but I think it's quite powerful. Those cities and communities that are saying, you know what, we have outdated zoning regulations, we've got outdated codes, they conflict with each other. We're going to name the problem here, and we're going to start sort of revising and reframing this to make common sense. So, there are good examples from cities that have taken a look at sort of the proportion of single family zoning that they have versus allowing for duplexes and triplexes, and sort of what are the roadblocks and regulatory pathways. But I would say there's no shining star student there, right? There's a lot of work to do in that space. I think sort of on a more national level, folks like Community Solutions, who they're a national organization that
Sure.
go in, work with communities, and help them create data-driven systems to actually look at what their problem is and not just respond to it. I think a lot of the real estate partners we have who are so creative with limited tools about how to preserve housing and keep it affordable, and a lot of the nonprofit partners that have definitely stretched and grown by working with us. And I think, I'm always looking for where's there really great public, nonprofit, and private sector alignment. Like that is the key, right? So the communities that use that as their North Star, I think are the ones that are having progress. And, you could point to Houston a couple years ago. They had a lot of headway in solutions to homelessness. They also didn't have the same challenges around zoning codes that most communities have. But they knew right away, like, we got to have alignment between these sectors.
So safe space here. Let's maybe flip that question around, and what are the ones that frustrate you the most, whether from a city level or not to name like outright names necessarily, but even among housing providers or real estate would-be partners, that like, what are the things that just drive you crazy?
What drives me crazy is when I observe turf. Like, hey, we've been doing this for 25 years. We're the experts.
Mhm.
That to me, it's not because that's
You've been doing it for
just
25 years and you haven't solved it. Like, what are you doing?
exactly. But also, where's the curiosity in trying something new and testing new ideas? I could point to the city I live in as like there's so much opportunity to be innovative, and we are held back by all of these issues that we say we're championing against. And so, to me, where perfection is the enemy of the good is where we have the most challenges.
Yeah.
And I will also say, I think a lot of times we look to elected officials to be sort of out there in front. Like, okay, they're the ones that are going to be first in. They're going to get rid of all of our regulatory barriers, or they're going to sort of take down anti-development. But honestly, they need people with community courage to step up and give them the fuel to be able to do that. And I think so often everyday citizens forget, like, that's on you. That's on all of
Yeah.
us. I mean, an elected official can only do so much if they don't have sort of community members that are also courageous.
I gotta weave this in because it's such a perfect segue. Uh, I watched the movie Cabrini last night. I don't know if you've seen it, uh, but where she says, "What type of world do we want to live in, and what will you do to live in it?" And it's such a call to
Yeah.
action, and I feel like so often I hear either, and I won't even say complaints because I feel like complaints is the expectation that you're going to do something about it, or that something can be done, but whining more as what is there possibly that I could do? Like I have no way to even make any dent in solving this problem. And as long as that is the mentality, you're absolutely right. Right? Whether you say you can
Yeah.
do it or you say you can't, you're right. Uh, and so yeah, I love that. I love that call to action. That I have to believe that there is something that every single person on this planet can do, and there are just a multitude of examples, and we
Yeah.
we see that in our work as well.
I mean, I keep a Post-it note, which I literally am going to show you. Your audience can't see it, but it's a James Baldwin quote that says, "Those who say it can't be done are usually interrupted by those doing it." So I have that there just in, there can be frustrating moments when you work in these spaces that are really heavy for people because they get at neighborhood change, they get at sort of things that are hard to face about socioeconomic challenges in this country.
Sure,
So,
sure. And so I assume the real estate partners, it's kind of the same thing, whether it's government real estate partners and both probably pointing the finger at each other. Is that the
yeah, I think sometimes there are just language barriers, right? If you're a real estate developer or investor, you want to try to have as much certainty as you can around a project. So when you're talking to 5 different people in the building and permitting department or whatever it might be called for a particular city, and you're getting 5 different answers, that's really frustrating, right? So
yeah,
I think sort of again, like this idea of treating each other like business partners, because ultimately that part of the Venn diagram in the middle, like we share, right? We want housing choice for everyone in our community. We want to combat homelessness in effective, sustainable ways. I think people align on those. It's just sometimes maybe we don't have the right platform or language or understanding of the other's risk.
yeah. I'm curious, when do you see this tension between, like, when people talk about housing as a human right, and I really want to get your opinion here as someone who works in this space, and I do, like, and sometimes I feel like that term is weaponized as well. Uh, but I guess philosophically you want it to be true. But talk a little bit about the choices from an individual capacity, because I know we want to make sure that those barriers to entry are removed and that people have opportunities. But to your point around one, taking action, two, building partnerships and aligning incentives, and then just three, as you talk about the personal accountability parts of it, uh, how do you make that case, not just for your real estate partners, but also I know I see this conflict sometimes between uh, people who want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity, as opposed to everyone must be housed. And you kind of hinted at this earlier in our conversation around people who are ready for a lease, right? People who are ready for a lease or ready to be housed in some other capacity, presumably. And I don't think most of the population understands that distinction. When they say housing is a human right, um, that, like, there are different levels on this continuum, and some people who are capable of living independently or not, and that there are different solutions at each stage. So maybe talk about that a little bit for us.
Yeah, wow. All right. Powerful question. I mean, every I'll match your philosophical question with bringing up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You've got this, for the listeners that don't know, it's this very groovy pyramid that talks about essentially evolving needs as you evolve as a person. But at the bottom of the pyramid foundation is basic safety and shelter.
Yep.
And I think that's probably where housing is a human right comes from. It also probably comes from historical movements. I think a lot about South Africa and Mandela's promise of, everyone gets housing, things like that. The challenge is what do you do when there's not enough supply? And we know, and I don't even know what the latest estimates are, but the last thing I read was 2.5 to 7 million units of housing.
Somewhere between 1.8 and 7.5. Like no big range there, right?
Yeah, it was like the weather forecast for this winter storm of how bad it could be. But we don't even know the problem we're solving, right? We don't even know, like, how do we begin to tackle this if we don't even have sort of the data on what it is we're trying to solve? And so, of course, we get scarcity in there, right? When I had a mentor who's a developer amazing guy, and every time I talk to him, I feel like I walk away being a better person. And he was telling me a story about a project in your city, which you can probably guess what it is, and I'll tell you after the recording. And he was talking to the mayor, trying to explain basic concepts of housing affordability and supply and demand. And he said, you got to think about it like a bag of sugar. If there are 10 people that want sugar, but there are only 3 bags, what happens to the price of the sugar? So he did a basic economics lesson that I thought was super powerful. And the challenge is, yes, we allow homelessness to exist in this country. It shouldn't.
Yep.
Do we have right now all the tools and the arsenal of alignment between public, private, and nonprofit sectors, the sort of catalytic funding to actually get out in front of it? No, we don't, right? So one, we have haziness over what it is we're actually solving. We have sort of resources that maybe are not aligned in what they're going after. And I think we don't have ownership, right? I mean, the thing that was really exciting in the last presidential election is we actually talked about housing affordability.
We did.
I mean, I was like, wow, oh my gosh, we're actually talking about this. Like it's rising to the level of sort of a national conversation. But, I get at, yes, of course, like that is the goal. So how do we work backwards and look at what we do to get people there? And I think there are a lot of economic drivers that we have to look upstream about what is causing so many people to either be so overburdened with cost around housing, and then also sort of upstream, like, why is it so hard to build housing? Which we could have a whole other podcast on that as well.
Yeah. And I guess the point is, though, that they're just depending on what situation you're in.
For sure. I mean, will everyone have a 4,000 square foot single family home? No way, because that's not the right solution for everyone, right? And also, when I was, 18, would I have been ready to have a huge home with lots of maintenance and all sorts of joys that come with home ownership around expenses? Probably not.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think we forget that if we look back a couple generations, we had all this different housing typology, whether it was single room occupancy, duplexes, triplexes. We had different choice in the actual physical options, and we have less of that today.
Yeah. Well, I also think about it in terms of just, you'd mentioned the low-income housing tax credit program, and the way that those projects are scored and ultimately receive funding is based on a lot of amenities, and they have minimum size units and so forth. And so a lot of times I'll hear, well, we don't have enough funding. Like, we just don't have enough funding to be able to create these projects, and housing is a human right. Therefore, we need to go fund it. You had mentioned earlier, $750,000 per unit in Los Angeles in 2017. Guys, the money doesn't exist. So
exactly.
So what do you do? And usually that's the time when I turn to them and say, you have an extra bedroom in your house. Are you ready to rent it out to a stranger right now? Because I have someone who's ready to move in. Things get a little quiet at that point. So there's, I mean, there's lots of personal questions to wrestle with here as well. But back to Lotus campaign. So where do you see yourself going in 2026? What's ahead, and the grand vision?
Yeah, I mean, 2026, we're going to work on continuing to expand our impact in Charlotte and Raleigh. Charlotte, our programs in Charlotte have been around a little bit longer than Raleigh, so there's a lot of partnership growth we want to work on. And really want to work on sort of the next market and growing our team. And you know this probably super well. You only grow around the pace and scale that you raise capital. So that's my job. But really looking to continue to expand impact in our footprint in our existing markets, work on the third. And then there's a lot of stuff that also comes with growth, right? Which is, how do I continue to refine the program based on what we've learned in these two markets? We've got some interesting technology and data infrastructure investments we've made over the past year, so we can gut check what we're doing. We map a lot of our impact and look at our data pretty regularly. I like to keep the goals clear and only have a few moonshots, but clear and sort of keep the path, because we were built to be replicable and scalable. And when we started, I was actually working out of my tiny apartment and COVID hit. So we're still here, which is great, and sort of working on building from what we started 7 years ago with a lot more resources.
So do you view this as a going national, or do you think there are going to be multiple Lotus campaign affiliates kind of started in each of these different regions?
The beauty of Lotus is our model was designed to be replicable and scalable. We know that has to be tailored to each market because each market has different unique characteristics. But we also know that the local on the ground presence is what matters most, because it's such a high touch. You can have all the structure in the world if you don't have the team there executing and sort of making sure the matchmaking between the partners is happening, making sure sort of nonprofit partner understands the requirements of a lease for their clients, et cetera, et cetera. So it's figuring out what's the balance between starting to scale and then that local high touch team aspect that's just necessary for the work.
Love it. Well, exciting times ahead.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap it up, Beth, with just some rapid fire Q&A. I'm curious to know, what is one daily habit that you keep and that hopefully keeps you grounded?
Yeah, so I started this past year because there's a lot going on in the world.
Like January or like 2025?
No, like
okay.
January a year ago,
Okay,
not
right.
3 weeks ago.
That counts.
So I have started. I'm an early bird. So I've started my mornings by having a slow cup of coffee and reading one poem every morning.
All right.
Which has been really, honestly, a great way to start the day. And then I usually get outside for a little bit before work. But by not having any technological distractions near me and just sitting quietly, even if it's just for 15 minutes, it's been a really, really nice practice for me to welcome in the day and kind of makes everything better no matter what else happens.
Love that. Any recommended poems for the rest of us?
Yeah, well, I love this book called The Poetry Remedy, which is a collection of poems, but
Okay.
essentially it's like a pharmacy. So there are different prescriptions based on different themes. So, for example, like When the World Feels Heavy, and there's a poem that
okay.
is prescribed for that. So I love that as actually like a starter poetry book because it's not just one
That's awesome.
writer.
Yeah, we definitely have to put that in the show notes. So is that what you're currently reading, or is there something else that you're reading or watching?
I have reading and watching. So I go back to this book a lot. That's a memoir called Lost and Found, and it's a book about grief and gratitude. And it's this writer, Catherine Schultz, and such heavy topics. It is literally one of the most beautiful books I've ever read, and now has become a go-to gift I give to people when, they're going through something, whether it's spectacular or hard. It's just a really beautiful companion. And then the other thing, this is not reading or watching, but listening. I'm totally on like a Bad Bunny deep dive because like he's
This
so
this really is
amazing.
a safe space.
I mean, he has this way of bringing joy without ignoring the realities of the world. And he brings this like total lightness to difficult moments. And I feel like, it's like my hype music. I'm like, that's what I want to do too.
All right.
So
All right.
if any of your listeners have a connection to his current tour, you know how to find me.
Okay. Well, at least they will when they check the show notes.
Yeah.
Biggest misconception people have about homelessness. I think we already kind of covered this one, didn't we?
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I would say, there's no one magic wand that's going to fix our housing crisis or solve homelessness. The path that someone finds themselves in where they ultimately become homeless is different for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think remembering that when people get really frustrated in their communities that it seems like there hasn't been a lot of progress, or you're seeing so many people out there on the street. But the other thing that I think goes along with this is this apt metaphor, the tip of the iceberg. Everyone associates homelessness with
What they say.
honestly folks that are experiencing the most
Acute
chronic
trauma,
levels
sure.
of it. And it's something called the tip of the iceberg. And national data says that's less than 30% of people experiencing homelessness, which is really heartbreaking.
Yeah, there was just a big story that came out in Atlanta that I'm sure will be no surprise to you. Unfortunately, was not a surprise to us either. That the number of people, thousands and thousands of families who are living in extended stay motels permanently.
Yeah.
And it gets back to this barriers to entry, access question, supply question as well. But yeah, it is. You're absolutely right. Tip of the iceberg, and just important, I think, for our audience to recognize that be kind to everyone you see, because you never know. And regardless of how they might appear in their daily work, a lot of struggles out there. So
Absolutely.
Well, Beth, thank you for joining us and for the work you're doing to bring clarity, data, and practicality to one of the most complex challenges we face as a country. And for our listeners, you can learn more about Beth and Lotus Campaign at lotuscampaign.org, and we'll include links below. Be sure to subscribe to One Room at a Time wherever you listen or watch, and tell us who we should talk to next. You can find us at padsplit.com/podcast. Until next time, everyone, thank you for joining us at One Room at a Time.